everyone to Static in the Feed. I am BotchTV, and this podcast isn't about fancy YouTube thumbnails or editing tricks or being the next Mr. Beast. It's about the side of content creation that nobody wants to talk about. The mental toll, the stress, the burnout, the lessons you learn along the way, the thought of quitting, all of that and more. So let's dive right in to my story and how I started. And perhaps some of you can relate to this as well. Or maybe some of you have already started your journey. I didn't have the average life growing up. A lot of my childhood was spent in the hospital, going through operations, recovery time, rehab, learning to walk, talk, and function again, and dealing with the reality of living with a physical disability that limited my physical capabilities. And on top of that, I grew up without my biological father. My father had passed when I was young, and I had no connection really to his family, and I still don't to this day at 27 years old. And that really meant that I had to step into the role of being the man of the household earlier than most kids ever have to think about. And because of the way my disability affected my standing and walking in everyday life, it should come to no surprise that I had a lot of bullies that would like to point that out. Even schools thinking that I was mentally disabled and incapable of really defending myself or advocating for myself, despite my disability only affecting my physical side of me. And I would be lying to you if that wasn't a huge effect on my self-esteem. But within that, it gave me different avenues and outlets where I could express myself and feel free to be me through writing poems, watching TV, a good book to read, or whatever the case was. Growing up in a school where sports was always a big thing, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you can relate to this, where sports is bread and butter, the blood, sweat, and tears of school and academics. The only way that I could play sports or do anything that the student body cared about, which was sports, not even people in chorus or band, it was just sports. The only way that I could play sports was if it was modified in some sort of way. For example, wheelchair basketball, or in high school when I found sled hockey, which was a form of hockey done on sleds for people with physical disabilities that couldn't necessarily perform the stand-up skating that was on regular hockey, like in the NHL. I played multiple positions on the ice, including defenseman, center, winger, wherever they wanted me. And I even got the chance to be on TV for the Special Olympics one year with Team USA, the Olympic team, and also be a part of the Sled Hockey World Cup tournament, where multiple countries throughout the world would compete for a gold medal or some type of trophy. I represented Norway because as a team, we had to choose what country we wanted to represent. I represented Norway, even though that I wanted to represent Germany because that's where most of my family ancestry lies. But it was fun. Eventually, I had to quit that because I would go to Canada, London, Ontario, and other parts of Canada to do tournaments one weekend and then have to drive back with very little sleep and having to work through homework and everything else and the stress of life, it got to be a little bit much for me. So unfortunately, I had to stop doing that and focus on my studies. But throughout all of this, I was still a very creative person. Video games gave me the world where I could explore without much limits. Like I mentioned, writing poems, short stories, and eventually finding passion in the world of pro wrestling. Watching WWE as a kid really was one of the things that I absolutely loved. Rey Mysterio winning the Royal Rumble in 2006, Edge and Christian, the Hardy Boys, and The Undertaker, and all kinds of stuff. And eventually the Anti-Diva Paige in 2014 and NXT in 2013. The idea of being a persona or playing this character, acting and playing this sort of exaggerated version of yourself for the sake of entertainment was very fascinating to me because, let's be honest, as creators, streamers, YouTubers, we're kind of already doing that, except without having to get in the ring and do suplexes and slams and, you know, choreograph a match together without trying to hurt the person that's in the ring with us. What really got me about pro wrestling was they cared more about how much you were as an entertainer. And yes, some people go beyond that and they trash the person online or whatever, but any actual fan with any sense of, you know, morality or anything, they don't do that. For the time, they judge you based on how you are as an entertainer. If you suck at entertainment, they're not really going to like you as much. And, you know, playing that antagonist or that heel or the protagonist and the babyface, or maybe an anti-hero known as a tweener in professional wrestling terms, for that amount of minutes that you're having that TV time and the audience that is watching you, they care about you as the entertainer. They don't see you as Greg or Ryan or whatever your shoot name is. Shoot meaning your actual name. They don't care about that. They care about how well they're being entertained as the audience, as the show that you paid to see. And that's really how I approach content creation. I approached it from the real perspective. I didn't really want to hide too much about who I really was. In about 4th grade to 5th grade, I decided to take my creativeness and everything else that I've wrote down on pieces of paper through poems and short stories and turn that into video content through YouTube. I had a friend of mine that is still my friend to this day. We've known each other since we were 9-10 years old. And we thought it would be cool to do YouTube together. The Optimus Prime 122 was my very first YouTube channel, and I just did random videos. There was no planning. There was nothing going on. I didn't even have what you would call a capture card, such as the Elgato Game Capture HD at the time. I literally just had a refurbished laptop that probably cost $200 to $300 and the integrated webcam on my laptop alongside my shower bench that I had when I had that big hip surgery, and I had to have that in the shower so I didn't fall because I couldn't stand for long periods of time because of my disability and the slippery terrain that is a bathtub. I literally took that bench, stuck my laptop on it, and pointed the laptop at the TV. I had like this webcam software, and I opened it up and I clicked record, and that is what I did for the longest time. And then eventually I upgraded to the Blue Snowball, Blue Yeti, Elgato Game Capture HD, and their recording software. And I just kept going as time went on, upgrading, getting to OBS, and then doing Twitch through the console and all this other kind of stuff. You name it, that's what I did. But in the early days of YouTube, there was no monetization. I believe monetization wasn't a thing until 2015. I'm pretty sure some of you could correct me on that if I'm wrong in the comments. And the only way to do that was if you were in a partnership with Machinima or someone else that was paying you to do money. But here's the thing with me. It wasn't never about the views. I didn't care about clickbaity titles and things that we now cringe at because of what content creation has become, especially with AI now. It was about sharing my creativity with the world, and it's always been that. If I ever got to the point where I was making money and I did turn YouTube and streaming into a full-time job and I never had to work a real job in my life, I would be 100% grateful for that. But it was never about that for me. I had teachers from my elementary school days, my high school days, and even college professors telling me that I had a talent for storytelling and a way of captivating an audience. I even took public speaking classes, spoke at school assemblies, and even ended up on local news stations and television. I never looked at that as I'm the shit or that I was above everyone else because I got those opportunities. I looked at that as these people trust me. They're not just telling me something I want to hear. And trust me, I learned to be able to decipher between those types of things where people would tell you something that you wanted to hear and those who meant it. YouTube just became that stage where I could share my voice along with many others who have already done it before me. Years later, when YouTube launched monetization, everything changed. People could make money off of YouTube. People could quit their 9-to-5 jobs and develop an online audience where this could be their way of life, their way of income. But again, like I mentioned before, it was never about that for me. But that doesn't mean the thought didn't come across my mind. Like most creators, when you look at something as a job and you look at it as your livelihood, you tend to look at it a lot more differently than if it was something that you just casually did as a hobby. Because, well, that means you got food on the table or that you could pay rent that month. I realized that maybe I'm not going to ever be the T. Martins or the Allies or the Kostefs of the world. And I had to come to terms with maybe that's not going to be me. There was this mental toll that I was experiencing, struggling with depression and anxiety on the sidelines. But also, I struggled with this idea of just being the kid with a cane, because I walked with crutches in school for the longest time, or a cane or some other handicap-assisted device, and people looked at me differently because of it. They often thought I was mentally disabled, often thought that I couldn't advocate for myself because they mistaken my physical ailment with some mental ailment. And I'd be lying to you if that didn't really get to my self-esteem at the time. I wanted to get rid of that identity, and I know that was an identity that was put upon me by others, but as my 7th grade teacher always used to say, you tell somebody enough times, they'll be inclined to believe whatever you're saying. The more times it's drilled into their head. And so I tried so hard to get rid of that identity. And that's where I found the identity known as Brian Outlaw and BotchTV. I had multiple channels over the years, and I just couldn't really find that niche. I couldn't really find that piece of content that I would become known for, that I would want to do. I would jump from one thing to the next. But I always loved sports. And I always loved commentary, the analytical side of it, and just the ability to tell a story without people seeing you. And Jim Ross was always one of those guys that came to mind. He had Bell's palsy, a couple of strokes, and a couple of health issues, and he's even come out a couple of times saying that Vince McMahon didn't want to show his face on camera. But here's the thing. Nobody cared about what he looked like. Everybody knew him for his calling abilities and the ability that he had to tell a story alongside Jerry the King Lawler and so many others. And I thought, well, I can do that. I've spoken in front of schools before. I've spoken just like I am now to every single one of you listening to this episode. So I don't really know why it didn't occur to me at the time that I could do this. Maybe I was just blinded by something, or I couldn't really tell you. When I was in college for music production, I wanted to be a music producer because music is another one of those ways that you could tell a story. Despite me loving music and making albums and, doing those things, I always gravitated back towards wrestling. I just couldn't get over it, man. Every time I would go in my dorm room, I would be like, all right, it's time to watch SmackDown or it's time to watch Raw, as I had Hulu at the time and I could just do that. And eventually I transferred colleges and went back home to save some money from paying room and board at the college that I was at. And I thought I'd give radio DJing a shot, be one of the next local radio hosts. But again, I still felt like I wasn't being myself. I feel like I was sort of censoring myself or not showing a part of myself that I could freely express. So, despite completing college during the pandemic and it being hell on earth, one thing remained the same. I really wanted to get into wrestling. It was during the college days when I was in college for music that I started doing RCW, Ravage Championship Wrestling, which was the former name of my EFED, which is a fictional wrestling promotion where you create your own wrestlers and you essentially make your own wrestling show by creating your own wrestlers, doing championships, booking your own matches, and commentating them. And that's what I did. I played against the AI and eventually kept on upgrading my format and the way that I do my shows, renaming it to what you guys know as Noble Pro Wrestling on the BotchTV channels. Fast forward from 2018 to 2026. We're coming up on 8 years of doing that as of August the 21st. So depending on when you're watching or listening to this episode, we might have already passed our 8-year anniversary. And I'd like to thank every single one of you that has made it possible. Regardless of the amount of views that my content gets, if it wasn't for you guys and the love that I have for professional wrestling, I don't know where I would be. I'd probably still be fumbling through college, figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, not realizing the potential that I had within professional wrestling. Now I find myself as a photographer, a commentator, a graphic designer, a video editor, and so many other things that I never thought that I could ever be. Even doing commentary for 2 of my friends' matches. Getting praise from WWE Hall of Famers, AEW talent, TNA talent, and other amazing people along the way that I've had the pleasure of meeting. I don't think it really hit me until legends like Mick Foley and Chris Jericho had really positive things to say about me. And yeah, I mentioned my teachers that I had in high school, elementary school, and up to college. But I think when legends in the industry that you want to be in, Chris Jericho, Sting, Mick Foley, and many others, when you get the opportunity to meet them, even have a 5 to 10 minute conversation with them, and within that 5 to 10 minute conversation, they're able to tell how passionate you are, how skilled you are, just from the way you talk and the way that you express yourself. And they have nothing but good things to say about you, and they want you to have a future in this business. I mean, how can you not think that you have something after that? You may have doubts within yourself, and I did. But when they said all those things, I started to realize, okay, kid, maybe you got something here. It wasn't until that I realized that I did. And I don't know why it took me so long. And there are a lot of ways that people measure success. But it's never about views, subscribers, or whatever. That is one form of success. But if it comes at the sacrifice of losing yourself, losing your mental health, losing the why. And there's something that John Cena had said on Unreal on Netflix where he talked about the why. Why do people care about that match? Why do people care about that story? Because if you lose the why, you lose everything. And the truth be told, there isn't always a reason as to why we do things. Sometimes we do things because we feel like it. Sometimes we do things because maybe we feel it's the right thing to do. There's like no specific reason. So I ask you this. To close out this episode, think about your why. Think about why you do the things you like to do. Really think about it. Because that just may be the reason why you keep going.